Thank you, Michelle. Great job as usual. Welcome back, everybody. It's great to see you. Wow, that light is bright. Welcome to 2024. I'm sure it holds a lot of great things for everyone at the college. Michelle was so gracious that she gave me exactly 7 minutes. So I'm going to be very brief with my remarks, but I have some important updates that I want to share with you. First things first, congratulations to everybody in the room. It really does take a village, but our enrollment is really trending in the right direction. 3 semesters in a row, we've exceeded our enrollment target before the semester even started. So we are really doing good things. I know it's a combination of great work in the counselors, great work in the classroom, marketing, branding, Office of Instruction, everyone. But also it's related to the fact that this is the first semester that we've had our free tuition initiative. I don't know if you know this, but there are 4,400 students between the 2 colleges who are enrolled for free at our district. That is far and away the biggest program anywhere in the country. You probably see ads for neighboring community college districts that I won't mention by name, talking about their free tuition initiatives and their promise programs. Most of those have about 100 students in them. So we have almost 97% of students in our service area who are eligible getting free tuition, which is fantastic. I expect those numbers to continue to climb. Another interesting area of note is you probably are aware that we waived all of our fees for health services for our students. And thanks to Yuko Kawasaki and her team's efforts, we have doubled the number of students who are seeking mental health counseling and utilizing our health services. 2,200 students utilized health services last semester alone. That's more than we've had in several years. So really good stuff. On the bad news front, our application for housing that we submitted to build a 300-room dormitory at Mission College for both colleges didn't receive any money. I'm not deterred because nobody received any money. It was in the initial governor's budget, and then they pulled that back as the economy started to sour. But we haven't abandoned our plans for housing, and right now we have 2 parallel programs going on. One here at West Valley College, where we're examining some of the open spaces for tiny house villages, and believe me, they look great. They look like mini Eichler buildings for those of you that are design aficionados. And we're still working on our project at Mission College. We got some bad news over the break, and that was that the Sobrato Corporation, who rents the 5 giant towers adjacent to Mission College, informed us that they are going to default on their lease. The bad news is that means we're losing out on $3 million of rental revenue to the Land Corp every year. The good news is that we inherit $275 million worth of buildings that they built. So we're working really hard right now to figure out a way to utilize that space for things like housing, more childcare, maybe even district offices, and of course, faculty and staff residence as well. So there's a lot going on as it relates to the Land Corporation and the property, but it's no secret that commercial real estate right now in the Valley is plummeting. We are insulated from a lot of those economic vagaries because of our basic aid status. You may have seen that the state issued its budget, which is about $60 billion in arrears, and they were so gracious to announce that there would be a cost of living adjustment of less than 1%. We will do much, much better than that this year, and we are in very good shape financially. We aren't even considering any types of reductions. We're looking for new ways to expand the offerings that we give to students and continuing to remove those barriers. The next phase is, of course, food. We've done a lot of really great things to make food more accessible for our students. But the next phase, and we've brought in a consultant to help us manage this, is to dramatically expand the food options at both campuses. We've got space in both campus centers because we've moved the bookstores online, and our hope is that we can expand our food options for students. I want to bring in nationally regarded food providers that our students recognize and are excited about. It's really a selling point. But I also want to continue working with our donors so that we can provide free food for students. So when they sign up and they get free classes, They also get on their ID card the ability to swipe 3 meals a day. We're about that close to doing it. So my hope is that sometime next year we can move into that field as well. I was talking to Chris Cruz earlier today. Where is he? He's over here. You probably know that park management is probably the furthest along of any program in terms of getting a bachelor's degree. So that's really big news for our district, because I think once we get one, we'll get many more, and we want to push forward with nursing and other things at Mission College. But I think it's just an amazing testament to this community that we are very close to having a free bachelor's degree program for any student who wants to enroll in it. Chris, you're going to have hundreds of park management students that you never dreamed of when that program happens. So lots of really good things that continue to happen at the district. If you're interested in the housing, if you're interested in the food initiatives, please poke your head into district council. Let us know if you want to be part of those teams that are evaluating those projects. The more the merrier. We'd love to have everybody's expertise on those things, because in many ways they will fundamentally change how our district functions moving forward. So, great enrollment, great news about housing, great news about budget. Before I introduce our next speaker, who really needs no introduction, and she wears her name on the back of her clothes now, I did want to share with you a little bit of bad news, and that bad news is that Trustee Jack Lucas, who's been on our board for 23 years, been in public service, get this, for 70 years. He passed away yesterday. Jack has been, a long-time dedicated servant of each and every person in this room. He cares about every project. I can't tell you how much time I spent with him. And luckily for me, I spent time with him just last Sunday. And when I was with him on Sunday, we were in his kitchen, and he was fumbling around with the ice cubes trying to put one in my scotch. And there was a picture of his wife on the refrigerator, and he turned to me and he said, "Take good care of your wife, because I really miss mine. She passed away several years ago." And then he looked at me and he said, "I'm kind of ready to join her anytime." So I've just been in this really weird place for the last several days. I feel like Jack knew, or Jack was, looking to the next stage of his journey. We'll have a memorial for Jack, and obviously there'll be more news to follow, but I wanted to share that with you because this was somebody who lived and breathed West Valley College and West Valley Mission District, and I don't know, there's got to be some record. There can't be too many people who've served public service for 70 plus years. So think of Jack today as you go about your business. I know he would be excited for All College Day. He just adored Dr. Taylor Mendoza and was really happy about all the things that we're doing to move the district forward. Now, without further ado, it's my job to introduce, please turn around. Like JFK or Jay-Z, we know her as just JTM. I'm so proud of the work that Dr. Taylor Mendoza and her team have done to calm the waters and steady the ship after an interesting couple years. They bring such enthusiasm and expertise and true care to their role, and I'm so excited for what they've done already and what they're going to continue to do. So enough of my entree. You want to hear from the main event, Dr. Jennifer Taylor Mendoza. Come on up, Jennifer. Have a great semester, everyone. Thanks for everything that you do. We so appreciate it.
First of all, happy 2024, everyone. Happy 2024. I think I've shared a lot that really, there are a lot of things that weighed into my decision to come here, but one of them for sure was Chancellor Davis and all the amazing work that you have done and the care and the attention you've put into this community and the knowledge. And so I want to always give it up to the Chancellor. So can we give him a round that he deserves applause for his hard work over the years? And also the amazing board that we have and how they model such excellence. And Trustee Lucas was such a great man, and I'm so proud and feel so privileged and feel so honored to have known him just for the couple months that I did. And so I just want us to, today, I'm thinking about him and his spirit, and I just want to give out a shout out to just an amazing educator and an amazing man. So one more applause for him. Okay. So I have completed my 100 days, and it has been amazing. Thank you so much for those of you who volunteered and signed up to walk around the campus with me, to expose and be vulnerable and share a little bit about yourself, and just about the history. Has been truly, truly amazing. So I'm excited to be here today to talk to you a little bit about my journey and just some of the things that I've learned about this amazing institution and all of you wonderful people, and just how we're going to move forward. I'm also really excited to talk today about real self-care, right? Real self-care. And to have an amazing speaker like Dr. Apunja come here and just really kind of guide us and take care of us. So I'll start a little bit about my story as they're getting the presentation up, and I'm going to show you a slide. So my journey too was one of transition. Over the summer before I came here, I actually went on a nature journey, a nature experience with individuals that I really didn't know. I'm part of this cohort of sort of professionals from various industries, and we're part of a cohort, and so we're doing this professional enrichment training, and it's a year-long training. And there we go. So that's me. Yeah, that's me. And we're on this journey together, and so I'm with these folks that I hadn't known long. It's sort of like the real world, right? Remember the real world, 7 strangers picked to be in a loft to get to know each other? Okay, so it's a little bit like that, but it's like a year-long journey. And part of the journey was for us to experience a week together in nature. In nature. So you think I'm a nature girl? Kinda, sorry. It depends, right? Okay, it depends. And I do love nature, but it was the first time me being with individuals for a week, and that is a bright light, without my family, without the folks that I've been with, right? And so I'm like, okay, what is this experience gonna be like? And so we were in the Sierra Buttes. You know where that is? The Sierra Buttes. And the goal really was to sort of get to this lookout, this fire lookout. And it was about, over 8,500 foot in elevation mountain summit. So that was our journey for us to get there. And we did reach the mountaintop together. It was wonderful. But on the way, we had other activities to experience. And one was rock climbing. And we weren't doing free solo, right? Not free solo. But we did do some rock climbing, which was really amazing. And I did really great, excelling and with the incline and going up. And so after you get on your harvest and all your safety equipment, you sort of have to check in with the person who's supporting you, right? And so they check in by saying to me, or the person, "Are you ready?" And so I say, "Yes." And then they say, "Are you really ready?" And then I say, "Yes." So we're gonna try it. So, "Are you ready?" Yes. "Are you really ready?" Yes. Okay, so it's kind of like that, right? Okay. So I'm doing great. I'm getting up the mountaintop. It was, you can see it was pretty high. And then it came the time for me to rappel. And once again, I'm with these folks. I'm with these kind of strangers that are not like my son, my daughter, my cousin, my husband, And so I got to the top, and it was time for me to rappel. And my coach, my person who's supporting, they're like, "Are you ready?" And I'm like, and "Are you really ready?" I'm like, "No," and I don't curse, but I was gonna say, "Heck no," you know what I said. And there's this fear that came over me, and this realization that there were people on the ground waiting for me, cheering me on, but I would have to rappel and really rely on folks that I don't know, right? And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, what if I fall? Oh my gosh, what if they don't care that I'm trying to get home to my son and my daughter, right? I mean, all of these things were in my head. And so as I was going through that nature experience, and why this is relevant, I was also thinking about my decision to apply and to be in West Valley College. And I'm sharing this because as you have experienced transition, so have I. And I was thinking, oh my goodness, I'm leaving this safe community that I've been a part of in my previous district for 13 years. What do I do? What if I get to know these people and they don't like me and I don't like them? What if all of these things happen? What if it's not a safe space, a place for growing and learning and growing? And so as I heard the chants, "You can do this, you can do this, keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going," I made the decision that I can bring myself, I can bring my heart, I can bring my energy into a new community. And I can have complete strangers care about me and not know about me, right? And get to know them. And you can rebuild. So that's why I share that story. Yes, I'm a little bit of an adrenaline junkie as well. But I share that story because I joined a new community and you have made it a safe place for me to be here, so thank you. I have relied on others that I had no history with. You know nothing about me. I have relied on you. You just know my professional experience, and it has been a joy. I have confidence in the process and the work that we're going to do together, and I have stayed centered to my core values, which is showing up for this community and showing up for our students and caring for you. So my transition, I rappelled into trust, and it has been a success. So thank you. Thank you very much. And anytime you want to go rock climbing with me, we can do that together too. So 100 days, what did I do? So the past is a past, but we need to know the past to move forward, right? That's important. I looked at the organizational assessment, trying to figure out what's going on, why were certain positions, integrated or institutionalized, what's happening with the areas and how people are feeling. I embarked on a listening tour. I emphasized presence, visibility, and accessibility for not only rapport building, but for people to be validated. And can you tell when someone's listening to you and when they're not listening? How many of you know that? Raise your hand. Yeah, right. How many of you left a conversation, you're like, they didn't hear a thing I said, right? Okay, right, okay. So, yeah, thank you. So it's important for me to listen and to get the noise out of my head and be really mindful of that. And that's just who I am, I think, my being anyway. But at times I also need to check myself and say, did you really hear that person? So that was the goal. So my reflections of you wonderful people, the 60 years of excellence. So first, shout out to Classified Professional. You embody hard work, dedication, and commitment. Oh my goodness. Hardest working team. I see you, I appreciate you, and we'll talk a little bit about how to make sure that your experiences here are what they need to be, right? And so that you get the coaching and the support that you need as well. Another thing, where are the faculty at? Oh my God, the teaching, the scholarships, the expertise, the excellence, the liberation that's happening with the curriculum, the continuing trying to innovate and disrupt. It is beautiful. It is like a little Stanford. That's what I'm saying. Anyway, or whatever Ivy League or whatever school you think is like amazing. Really great stuff happening in the classroom and the care and attention, and I'm loving it. Administrators, shout out to you all. You are resilient and you are caring. Give yourself a pat because it's hard to transition, okay? It is hard, and I appreciate you. And so important, our students, not even our associate students, all of our students, they are so engaged, and it's unsurpassed, and they are amazing. So there are probably no students today, but when you see them, thank them for just being part of this community. I've been in this profession for a while, and I'm saying this, and I told this to some other colleagues. They're like, are you serious? I've not seen student engagement like I've seen it here. And I think there's several reasons for that. So we can talk about that later. But that has been just amazing to see. Some other notable observations, and if hopefully you can see, but appreciation for the art, the athletics, fashion, and music. Are you here today? Good. Supportive trustees and student-centered district. We are so grateful to have that. The opportunities for career education. Yeah, it's okay. We are CTE. There you go. I'm still in that. That's Dean Gabriel. We are CTE, yes. We have a collaborative culture. Look at you all today. Look around. Look around who's here and look around who's not here. And how do we bring them and continue to bring them into the culture? Community support, a beautiful campus, and then my motto for 2024, and I hope we can do this, we are gonna have some fun. We're gonna have some fun. It's gonna continue to be fun and lively. We're gonna have some fun, okay? So 7 themes. So what did I hear about? When I was on the walk and talks, doing my own research, what are the things that came up? So college infrastructure, coherence, and continuity. And that really has a lot to do with the organizational assessment, right? How do we begin to expand classified? How do we plan to resource areas that need the resources they need, right? How do we look at the academic affairs in the schools and say, oh, these departments maybe belong here and these departments maybe belong here? You know, looking at different reporting structures as well. We started our BRAC process, and so we want to rely on that to continue to assess annually what are the things we need to make the organizational structure better. And we're not basing it on personalities. We're basing it on the positions and what makes sense. So I'm excited that we're continuing this assessment this semester, and we'll have our first phase of where we think we're going to be headed in April. Another thing, a foundation in participatory governance, transparency, and care in college leadership, communication to build understanding, clarity in messaging, consistency, and participation. So let's do a pulse check and be real, because that's all you can do. How are we doing with communication? Is it getting better? How many, like, are we at a 5 maybe? 6? How many think we're a 6 and above right now? If you can be real, it's okay. Okay, so we have some work to do, right? That's okay. And that's the plan, because when you have participatory governance, when things are transparent, you want to make sure you communicate, and you can have various layers of doing that, but it needs to be clear as well. So that's what we're going to continue to work on. Shared governance equates shared responsibilities. So as we're part of these committees and we have representatives, how is that information getting shared out, right? How are we making decisions together? How are we going to use College Council to really bring this to fruition? And so we're going to continue to focus on participatory governance as we move forward. I think for me, I learned leadership as a faculty leader. I had an amazing Senate president, and I learned about how to be a great leader and understand the college through a faculty lens. So how do we really embody participatory governance to support our students? This one's a tricky, and this was hard, but it was good to hear. So how do we find common ground through trust and choice, right? Trusting each other together and making the choice. The reason I love to go to bed each night, because I get to wake up and I can make well, hopefully, right? But make the decision to be better. It comes, you know better, you do better. You make the decision to be better. You make the decision, I'm going to apologize to that person. You make the decision, I'm going to forgive this. You make the decision, I'm going to go check in. And so what I've learned, there are a lot of behaviors that are out there, right? So we have this, what I'm calling positive behavior, where forgiveness creates momentum, right? And forgiveness is hard, right? Right? There are like 3 people in my life and not here anymore that I have to constantly work on to forgive. And I'm not the only person, y'all. And on our walks, you can ask me, who are those 3 people you're talking about? But you know what I mean? Is anybody in here with me? Can you relate? Yeah, right? It is hard, and it is draining at the same time. It's draining to hold all of that, and it's hard to let it go, right? But forgiveness is what we need to keep going. I believe doing no intentional harm builds harmony. How are we coming to work, right? Harmony. And respect earns respect. So remember that, respect earns respect. So you want to be treated a way, you should treat others the same way, right? Be the change you want to see, right? And I feel that negative behaviors, what I'm hearing or what I've heard, bullying stalls progress, right? Gotcha moments through emails and other means are divisive, right? And othering is unproductive and harmful. Those administrators, those faculty, those students, those classified professionals, right? A house divided cannot stand. I had someone say, those administrators, I was like, who? I was like, my name is Jennifer. Like, treat me like Jennifer Taylor Mendoza. I am a unique person. There's only one, and be proud of that. Be happy there's only one of me, but there's one. So treat me as you get to know me. Please try not to base anything off of something else. So you have the choice. We all have the choice, and I'll just leave on this. You can choose to do positive, or in my eyes, you can choose to be negative. You'll have to figure it out. It's in your own time. I'll still be here with open arms, but it's your decision. You'll have to make that. Okay. Deepening community engagement. Deepening community engagement to no longer be the best kept secret. I told the chancellor, oh, look, you hired me, everybody's gonna know about West Valley. It's over, it's over. But, and I say this because when I'm in the community, when I'm talking to all of you, folks don't know a lot about who we are. TOPS and transfer, all the excellent programs that we have. And I don't want that to be the case anymore. So we're strategizing how we can continue to share the beauty that we have at West Valley College. So we're gonna be focusing on this. Making sense of equity, inclusion, and justice. Can we give an applause for all those folks who helped with the Anti-Racism Action Plan? Thank you. So there was tons of work that had happened, tons of work. So thank you. We have an executive summary that we're gonna post. And I'm excited to transition it into the institutional equity plan. And what I found when talking with all of you about equity and inclusion, we've done the research, we kind of have the goals and priorities, but what makes sense for West Valley College? We serve Saratoga, Los Gatos, and Campbell. What makes sense for her? Us. Not what makes sense in Oakland, not what makes sense in San Mateo, what makes sense Santa Clara County, West Valley College for us. And so that's what we're gonna do. And that's exciting. Maybe it's economic prosperity and helping students get jobs. Maybe it's justice. We don't know yet, but we're gonna define what it means to us. So I'm excited about that journey. Academic excellence defined by innovation and disruption. Innovation necessarily disrupts the status quo. And that's what we're talking about. When we think about the curriculum and programming and pathways, how do we make sure students are inspired, that critical thinking occurs, right? Liberatory education, civic engagement, training someone to go out there to be not only a better citizen, but to give back, to impact state policy, national policy, wherever, giving them, inspiring them to do what they need to. So we're gonna think about programs and curriculum and how we are in the classroom or in our service area, and how do we disrupt those things so that you ignite fire in someone's eyes to give them their purpose and their cause to move forward, right? You pay it forward. So that's what I'm talking about with disruption, and we're gonna get more into that a little later. So I have an activity for you, and it'll be a pair and share, so look to your neighbor. Hopefully you like your neighbor, but positive behaviors, right? Okay. So I call this, give some ideas, get one. So answer this question, and I get a couple minutes. In your role, how do you promote student achievement? How do you promote it? And I want your partner to listen. And I want the partner who's listening to take one or two pieces of information or ideas that comes from the other person. Does that make sense? So you give some ideas, one person will give some, and the other person's gonna take some, right? You got it? 2 minutes, go. Oh, good. Thank you. So, get one. I would love of just a few of you to shout out what ideal that your partner shared that you might be interested in holding on to. Anyone willing just to shout it out? Ask questions. Back there. Absolutely, having real expectations of our students, realizing where they're at. We meet them where they're at. And how do we go from there? Good, in the back. Absolutely. How do you build that self-confidence? How do you build that student the ability for them to do the work? So you talked about highlighting accomplishments. Good. Yeah.
Be a resource of information.
Be a resource of information. Someone comes to you, help them out, walk them over. Don't just, have them run around in circles, right? Yes. Love it. Group work. Yes, group work, presentation, and facilitating all that. That is awesome. I love it. So they can share ideas, get to know each other. What else comes to mind? Yes. Making students feel comfortable, like they belong. We are a community for all, right? Regardless where you come from. Yeah, good. Oh, I love it. And she said, go the extra mile, do the extra work you need, right? I love that. Anyone else want to? Yes.
I thank them for choosing West Valley College because we're very lucky in our area. They have many choices. They're 40 minutes from several different community colleges, so I thank them, for choosing West Valley College and for giving us a chance and prove them right for being here.
Absolutely. They don't need to be here, right? Let's be real, right? And thank them for choosing us. I love that very much, yeah. Anything else before we move on? Anyone want to share? No? Great. Yes. I love it. I love that. That's great. I agree. Have everyone else join in and applause and appreciate them as well. Great. Thank you so much. So we're going to, yes. One more time, say it for me. Yes, yes. So basic needs, making sure their basic needs are taken care of. Very good. Yes. Love that. So we're going to continue to have that. We already have a commitment, but we'll continue to refine it. So here are some of the next steps to keep us moving. So number one, theme one, we're going to build a sustainable organizational structure that meets the operational needs. So if we're asking you to show up and do this work, we need to make sure you have support in the area in which you work. Theme two, reinvigorate College Council to model participatory governance. And so there's been some changes to College Council. It's on everyone's calendar. I hope you at least show up for one. It's going to be a fun time. Theme three, reinforce and we're going to encourage positive behaviors to move the institution forward. Theme four, create an organized system to support external partnerships. And I'll talk more about this as the semester moves on. Theme five, integrate planning to assess and establish metrics leading to equity impact and actual measurable outcomes so we know that we are moving the needle. Theme six, we're going to continue to create relevant curriculum and innovative programs that are responsive to student needs, career trends. And theme seven, we're going to refocus EMP utilizing, so that's our educational master plan, to focus on student completion data and economic forecasting. Are students graduating on time, but are they getting a job so that they can change their circumstance, right? That's what it's about. So we're going to focus on that. So my 100 days will be documented. It'll be a report. We're creating a whole website around it and even measurable outcomes because I have a fantastic researcher, Shisaku, is going to help with that. Just shout out to research. And shout out to marketing who'll make it look pretty. So for all that work. And so you'll be able to track this over this semester and the next year as well. Overall, the college will continue to prioritize mental and, of course, our financial well-being. And Anthony won't let me any otherwise. This guy, woo! Very conservative as we move forward, but it's a good thing. So, and we're going to talk a little bit about self-care today. So we are fortunate. Is she in the house? Dr. Punja, are you here? I'm going to read her bio. We are very fortunate. And it's Laxman, yes. Doctor, and pronouncing someone's names right is really important to me, so I can explain that to you later. So Dr. Punja Laxman, MD, is a board-certified psychiatrist, an author, keynote speaker, and a contributor to the New York Times. Her debut book, Real Self-Care, love this title, Crystal Cleanses and Bubble Baths Not Included, is an NPR Best Book of 2023 and a national bestseller. Real Self-Care has been featured by Good Morning America's NPR Code Switch, the New York Times, the Ezra Show, The Guardian, and translated into 9 languages. Beautiful, beautiful. Poonja serves as a clinical assistant professor of psychiatry at George Washington University School of Medicine and maintains an active private practice where she treats women struggling with burnout, perfectionism, and disillusionment, as well as clinical conditions like depression, anxiety, and ADHD. You can help me with professionalism. She frequently speaks, advises, and consults for organizations on mental health, well-being, and real self-care. Pooja also writes the email newsletter, Therapy Takeaway, which is available for free on Substack. So welcome, please, to the stage, Pooja. Thank you. You're welcome.
Good morning. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you, Jennifer, and all of the leadership for bringing me to West Valley. It's my first time in Saratoga, California, and y'all, this is a beautiful town. This is a gorgeous town. I told Michelle when she was driving me over from the hotel, I was like, I want to come back to college. I want to go here. I don't have any slides. I'm just going to talk. This is being recorded, so I know y'all have notepads or little cards to put questions down. Don't feel like you have to take a ton of notes or everything like that because it's going to be uploaded onto the portal, and you can listen to it again like a podcast. So my understanding is that here at West Valley, all of you, the faculty and the staff, have been through a whole bunch of transitions lately. Transitions in leadership and administration, but also just the whole thing about, kind of coming back from COVID and figuring out how to not only take care of yourselves and deal with your own grief about how things have changed and how life and work and family is different now that we're outside of lockdown, but also how to figure out how to reach your students, who we know all the research is showing that for young people, mental health is a huge crisis. And y'all are kind of at the front line of that, but you're not therapists. Some of you might be, but that's not your training, right? But the students are bringing all of that to you. So I have about 45 minutes to give you a whirlwind tour of how to deal, basically, how to deal with this tension that you're feeling, very normal tension that you're feeling. The other thing I want to say is that, a lot of times in times of transition, we can find ourselves destabilized, but in reality, transition actually is an opportunity for growth. It can be a valuable period of time to figure out how to change. So there's a huge opportunity actually in times of transition. So I want you to remember that. Okay. How many people in the room, if you're thinking about my talk and what you want to get out of it, how many folks here want to learn how to feel better? Okay, great. All right. How many folks have or are dealing with burnout? Okay, actually less than I expected. Good job. How many people want to learn how to change the system? Okay. So what if I told you something paradoxical? What if I told you that your ability to change the system actually depends on your own mental health and well-being? That your mental health and well-being is intimately linked with your ability to change the system. So I'm a psychiatrist. I take care of patients one-on-one. I treat folks that have depression, anxiety. I've had my own history of depression, anxiety, going to therapy, all these things. So I can't tell you guys how to change the system. That's your job. But I can give you some principles around how to make decisions in your life aligned with real self-care. And hopefully by the end of our time together, you will understand how the two are linked and kind of what I'm proposing or hypothesizing here. The reason that this is so important is not only because of everybody that raised their hand saying they wanted change, that they wanted to be part of a collective action to systemic change. The reason that it's important is because, in my view, change is something that is never a destination. Because we live in a society and a culture that is one of capitalism and that is built on white supremacy. We are always trying to move towards equity. And the reality is, in our lifetime, we won't get there. We won't ever be at that place. So my definition of success when it comes to collective action and change is that I want all of you to stay in the game. Staying in the game is the goal. And I want to stay in the game too, right? Like, that's the goal. It's kind of like geese, they fly in a V, right? And there's the leaders of the V are always switching out. When one bird is tired, their wings are tired, they fall back and the next one comes up, but they're always flying. They're always staying in. So that's the whole thing. That is the promise of real self-care, that if wellness is personal, then we can at least have a chance of getting to collective action and change. Whereas when wellness is commercial, then we don't even have a chance. Okay, is everybody with me? Yeah? Okay, good. So I want to tell you a story of a woman that I met in Bangalore, India. And through my time with you all today, I'm going to be telling a bunch of stories because I do believe that the way we learn and the way that things stick for us is through stories. So I met Sanjana, I think it was 2015, 2016. I was a psychiatry resident at George Washington University in DC, and I got a small stipend of money, like, I don't know, $2,000 or $3,000 to go to Bangalore in India to do a research project. And my focus at the time was on global mental health. And in kind of the scope of research, this isn't like real research. This was like a tiny little thing. But for me personally, it was a huge thing because my parents are from India. My grandfather was a professor in India, and he actually immigrated to the United States in the 1960s. He was a professor of pharmacology. He's passed away now. But he left India because we were not the top caste in the caste system, so he felt he was being discriminated against in academia, so he left to come to the United States. Anyway, so to go back to Bangalore and be doing research was really cool for me. So I was conducting the study at a small clinic in a village outside of Bangalore, and this woman, Sanjana, she lived in an even further out village, so she had to take like 3 buses to get to this clinic, and she had to travel a whole day to get there. And she was there because she had migraines and she had depression. And the reason she had those conditions is because her family worked in the power looms. So the power looms are these big machines that spin the silk to make saris, which are those beautiful cloth garments that South Asian women wear. And they're really loud. So she developed migraines and then she developed depression. So she came to this clinic to get treatment. And it was a really big risk for her to come because in India, especially in rural villages, still at this time, there's a lot of stigma about mental health. There's a huge amount of stigma about, having a diagnosis and then even getting treatment for it. And she had 3 daughters. And in India, especially in rural India, having a daughter is a disadvantage to having a son. Because daughters, when they get married, you have to pay a dowry, which is basically like a gift of money or gold or something to the groom's family, basically in exchange for taking care of your daughter. So she had 3 daughters. So by taking 3 buses and leaving her village and coming to get care, if anybody found out, she might be impacting the marriage prospects of her daughters. But she did it anyway. She took a risk. And that's a common theme here today, taking a risk. So I want you to remember Sanjana, remember her story, because we're going to come back to her at the very end. Okay, so Real Self-Care, title of the book. If you are somebody here in America where we still also have stigma about depression, anxiety, burnout, all these different things, if you were experiencing something similar to Sanjana, not obviously to the same degree, because obviously as a woman in rural India, her condition is very different, her social determinants of health are different, but you could be experiencing some version of the same thing. And what our culture tells you to do is take a bubble bath, do a juice cleanse, use a meditation app, right? The wellness industry is I think right now it's like $4 trillion industry. It's big business, it's commercial. So remember what I said in the beginning, when wellness is commercial, we have no chance at getting to collective action and change. But when wellness is personal, then at least we have a chance. So what happens in my practice around this is I'll have patients come in, and I take care of women. So it'll be a woman saying, Dr. Lakshman, I'm stressed out, I'm burnt out, I'm not sleeping well, I'm not eating well, and I feel like it's my fault because I have the meditation app on my phone, and I know I should be using it, but by the end of a long workday, the last thing I want to do is meditate. All I can bring myself to do is like lay on the couch and scroll Instagram or binge Netflix. And so I'm basically always screaming to my patients, like, this isn't your fault. We live in a country where 30 million Americans don't have health insurance, where 25% of American workers can't take a paid sick day, where if you're a black woman working in America, you have to work for 19 months to make the same amount of money that a white man will make in 12 months, right? Social determinants of health. But when the wellness industry tells us that you can buy your way to feeling better, we exonerate all of those systemic structural factors that actually are the cause of why we feel so bad. So then what is real self-care? Like, what do we do? Here is my proposition to you all, and I'm going to walk you through the steps. And as I say this, I want to also kind of caveat it for you in that I'm not, so the whole premise of my work is that I want all of you to have a different conversation in your mind and with each other about self-care. I'm not here to give you one answer because real self-care is different for every single person in this room. I'm here to spark a new type of thinking and for you to take what you're hearing today and wrestle with it, think about it, talk to your colleagues about it, talk to your friends about it, and then come to your own conclusions. As I'll talk about in a little bit, I made the mistake about a decade ago of thinking that I could get self-care from somebody outside of me. But the reality is, our self-care, our real self-care, can only come from inside of us. It has to come from your own choices, which are specific to your life situation, your identity, how much money you have, what social support you have in your life, whether you're a parent or not, whether you have a disability, right? So nobody can tell you. Nobody could say, hey, Pooja, just go to a SoulCycle class. That's what you need to do, right? I don't like SoulCycle, right? So it's not gonna work for me. You have to make your own decisions and your own choices. Okay, so there's 4 principles of real self-care: boundaries, compassion, values, and power. Boundaries, compassion, values, power. We're gonna walk through each of them, and in between I'm gonna tell some stories. So the first one, boundaries. If you scroll Instagram, there are just tons of posts about boundaries, like everyone's talking about boundaries. My take on boundaries is a little bit different. So I came to understand this in 2016. I had just graduated my psychiatry residency at GW, and I got my dream job on the faculty. I was going to be one of the supervisors of the Women's Mental Health Clinic. They offered me an administrative position as the associate program director of the residency. I was like over the moon, so excited. So my mentor, she took me out for lunch on my first day on the job, and she was like, Pooja, I want to give you a piece of advice. And I was like, kind of waiting with bated breath. I was like, oh, maybe it's like some, secret about how to dose SSRIs or, how to like taper medication, right? No, she was like, Pooja, you don't need to answer your phone. You can let it go to voicemail, listen to what they want, decide, and then respond. And at the time, that was mind-blowing to me because I had just done residency in medical school, and in those days, we had pagers, beepers, and the pager would go off and you had like this PTSD response and you immediately had to call back. So I was like, oh my gosh. And then I realized your boundary is the pause. It's the pause that is the boundary. And sometimes it would be like the front desk and they would have like insurance paperwork for me and I would say, okay, I'll come around when I'm done with patients. But other times it would be a patient who, like, let's say she had ADHD and I knew that if she missed a day of her ADHD medicine, she literally might lose her job or get into a car accident. So in that case, I'm going to call in that refill right away. I pause, I consider the request, and then I respond. And you always have 3 options: yes, no, or negotiate. Yes, no, or negotiate. Because the reality is that no always comes with a cost. No always comes with a cost, whether it is financial, social, interpersonal, emotional. And the price that you pay for no is impacted by your social determinants of health. If you are a Black woman, you're going to pay more for saying no. If you have a disability, you're going to pay more for saying no. If you're trans, you're going to pay more for saying no. So you have to do that calculus in your mind and decide whether it's worth it for you. And let's say it's not. Let's say you get a request that comes in and you're like, I really wish that I could say no to this, but I can't. I can't tell my boss that I'm not willing to work late tonight. I can't tell the administration that I'm going to not pick up another course. Let's say you can't. Well, then what you do is you make a note for yourself and you say, all right, 1 year from now, I want to be closer to being able to say no. What do I have to do in the next year to be closer to no? And that's tangible, right? You can map that out for yourself. So that is the boundary. The boundary is the pause, and our social determinants of health impact how accessible a no is for us. All right, so boundaries, that was the first principle. Principle 2, compassion. It's funny, maybe like a decade ago, if somebody would have talked to me about compassion, I would have like just totally rolled my eyes. I would have been like, oh my gosh, like the crystals, the tarot cards. I know we're close to Santa Cruz, so hopefully nobody's gonna like come at me on Twitter. My definition of compassion comes from more of a psychological grounding. So I think of compassion as psychological flexibility, which is kind of a heady term. We'll come back to digging into it. But this comes from acceptance and commitment therapy. Acceptance and commitment therapy is a third wave psychotherapy. So the first wave was Freud. Second wave was cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT. And with CBT, they said, you can change your thoughts, right? Change your thoughts. The third wave, and Freud said everything is your parents' fault. The third wave is more influenced by mindfulness and Buddhism and says, actually, it's pointless to try and change your thoughts because life is suffering. We can't get rid of the suffering. We can't get rid of the hard feelings. Instead, focus on committed action. Focus on the next steps. Focus on who you want to be and how you want to live. So psychological flexibility comes from there. And compassion in this framework is all about how you talk to yourself. And when I say talk to yourself, I don't mean talking out loud. I mean that inner voice that's in your head. And all of y'all are faculty or staff at a college. And so I know just by definition of you being in this room that you are really hard on yourselves. And that inner voice about, wanting to do the best thing for your students and wanting to make sure that you are over planning for your curriculum and wanting to make sure that you're meeting every single request that's coming in. I feel with confidence that inner voice for you is probably a bit of a taskmaster. So compassion is all about recognizing how you talk to yourself and softening it. And there might be some of you who would say, yeah, Pooja, but isn't that just like being weak? And so for that, I have a story. So a couple of years ago, I met this woman who, the situation really stuck with me. She wasn't a patient. I think maybe she had actually interviewed me on her podcast or something like that, and the story stuck with me. So she was somebody who had a good job, her husband worked, she had a good life. She was privileged. They had enough money, they had 2 kids, they owned their house. She didn't feel like she was wanting for anything. And the problems that she was dealing with were, white people problems, rich white people problems. So the one day her neighbor said, her neighbor was a chef. And so he was like, Amy, I'm trying out this new recipe for this really amazing steak. I'd love to bring some over for you guys for dinner one night. And her mouth was literally salivating as she was like, no, we couldn't take that from you, no, it's okay. And it sunk in for me as she was telling that story just how ridiculous this was. Because she felt like, because she had so much in her life, that she wasn't worthy of taking a gift, of receiving a gift, because there's so many other people that are struggling more than her. And more than that, she worried that she would be imposing on her neighbor. But the reality is that this neighbor guy, this was his bid for community. He was offering because he wanted to have a connection with her and her family. So by her rejecting it, by her saying, no, we're fine, we couldn't do that, she was actually rejecting his bid for connection. So when I talk about compassion, I'm talking about the way that we talk to ourselves. And I'm also talking about our capacity to receive help and to give help. And I think there's a lot of conversation, especially nowadays, about giving, especially if you're somebody who has privilege, about giving and being generous. But I don't think that we talk enough about being able to actually receive, because that's a skill too. And especially in our hyper-individualized society, we don't really learn it. We don't learn how to receive. And so here's how you do it. So another story, this was a patient of mine, actually like a composite of multiple patients, because it happens, some version of this happens all the time. So she had a couple kids, little kids, her husband traveled for work, and one day in session with me, she was like, my husband's gonna be away for one night for work, and yeah, my sister, she lives in town, and she offered to come over and help with dinner and bedtime, but I was like, no, it's fine, it's just one night. I'm gonna be fine. And I was like, well, yeah, but you're gonna be fine, but you could still say yes. Why do we have to wait until we're on the floor at a puddle to say yes to somebody offering help? Why do we have to wait until we're so burnt out that we can't get out of bed? What if you said yes to people offering, even when you didn't need it? So just like boundaries, receiving help is also a skill. It's a muscle that you have to build. And the way that you start building is by saying yes, even when you don't need it. That's how you start building. Because then when you actually do need it, you've had practice and you know how to receive it. So now I'm going to take a little bit of a segue, and because we're on the principle of compassion, I'm going to share a little bit about my personal story, because you might be wondering why I have so much to say about real self-care. And it actually comes from my professional life. for sure, but it also comes from my personal life. And I share this story in the context of compassion because every time I share it, I am still a little bit nervous because it's a bit of a wild story for a 40-year-old psychiatrist to be sharing on a stage with a whole bunch of strangers. So I'm asking for your compassion too. I'm modeling for you that we can be brave. So more than a decade ago, in my late 20s, I was actually a student at Stanford. I was doing my psychiatry residency at Stanford. And up until that point, I had done everything that a good second-generation Indian girl was supposed to do. I went to an Ivy League college, I went to medical school and became a doctor, I got married to a really good guy. I did everything. And once I was at Stanford, I was in my second year of residency and I'd done all these things and I was like, okay, well now I checked all the boxes, so let me figure out how to be happy. Let me figure out how to actually, take care of myself. And I remember at the time I was reading Gretchen Rubin's The Happiness Project, and I was like taking notes. I was like very serious about it. And at the time I was learning to become a psychiatrist, I was training, and I had all these questions that were coming up in the context of me sort of trying to figure out what are my values, what do I really want? I was asking questions like, and this is very technical, but anybody who knows things about mental health, but the type of things that I was asking questions about was like, oh, well, why when somebody comes in with borderline personality disorder, does insurance not cover their hospital stay versus when somebody has bipolar disorder, their hospital stay gets covered? And there was no good answers to those questions. Or other things like, somebody comes into the ER and they're unhoused and we can't get them housing. We can give them Zoloft, but we can't get them housing, and what they really need is housing. Or a patient who loses her job because she doesn't have childcare. I can do therapy with her, but I can't make her employer give her job back when she's been discriminated against. Anyway, so all this to say, I was having an existential crisis, and I blew up my marriage. I moved into a commune in San Francisco, one of the very out there San Francisco communes. It was focused on meditation and spirituality and sexuality. It was a commune that was focused on female orgasm. My parents, my South Asian parents, were not thrilled. And then I left Stanford, and I spent 2 years with this group because I thought that if I followed this guru, if I followed this path of enlightenment and spirituality, that would fix all the problems in my life. And as all of you in this room who I imagine are perfectly reasonable people, it didn't, spoiler. And yes, I found out many years later that it was actually a cult, because they always are cults. But the important part of the story isn't actually that I blew up my life and I joined the commune. The important part is that after I left, my life was ruined. Really, I thought my life was ruined. I was totally depressed. I spent my 30th birthday, I turned 30 in my childhood bedroom in my parents' house. I was nearly suicidal. And I did the bravest thing that I've ever done, which is I decided to come back to medicine. And I had to come back admitting that I failed. And it was terrifying. It was terrifying. But I did it. I did it. And this time, when I came to medicine, I came understanding that if I was going to be a doctor and not be burnt out and not be disillusioned and not be rageful at the system, then I had to make this career my own. I had to make it my own. So I got a position at GW. I finished my residency. I did the global mental health track. I came on the faculty. I really tailored it. And then after I was there for 3 years, I negotiated with them so that I could stay on the faculty doing just the things that I really liked doing, start a private practice. During that time, I started writing for the New York Times. I started doing advocacy on social media. At the time, everybody was like, Pooja, what are you doing? Why are you on social media? Why are you on Instagram? But I was able to talk to people and actually talk like this, not just like a peer-reviewed paper where, it's mind-numbingly boring, and you go to a conference, it's like 4 people arguing over the same thing. Like, right? Like, actually write things that people read. And in doing that, I had to understand that I was allowed to make this career my own based on my own strengths and my own values. I'm not a researcher. I don't like writing peer-reviewed papers. I really love doing this. I love writing these types of books. I love seeing patients. I'm a clinician. I still see patients. And actually, as I was writing the book and going through this journey, I had the opportunity to interview basically the woman, the researcher who is kind of like at the pinnacle of my field being perinatal psychiatry, women's mental health. She's currently the chair at UNC. So I got to interview her for this article that I was writing for the New York Times, and I was like so nervous, Samantha Meltzer Brody, oh my gosh, like, what is she gonna think of me? And the first thing she said on the phone is she was like, Pooja, you have done so much for women's mental health. And here I was like shaking in my boots because I was like, oh, like I'm just like doing this Instagram stuff. And she gave me this gift. She recognized that in order to get to change, in order to build the structures and the systems and the world that we want, we all have to take our own paths. You can't just climb the ladder because you think that's what you're supposed to do. You have to make it your own. So if y'all remember, when I first got on stage, I said that the way to get to collective change was actually to take care of yourself, to make sure that you were pursuing your life in alignment with what is actually really important to you. This is why. Because the whole thing is about staying in the game. You know, one of the things that I've noticed as I've been traveling around the country speaking about the book is I've done, I think, 2 talks now for educators. One was for early childhood educators, and then another one was for higher ed folks. And I realized that there's actually a similarity between people who are educators and people who go into medicine. I think it's like they're both very mission-oriented types of personalities, also really stubbornly idealistic. And the working conditions in both fields are, I don't know, I'm not sure if I'm allowed to swear, so I'll say very crappy, right? So you have these hardworking, really smart, talented, idealistic folks who are trying to change the world, but then they're inside these structures that are quite difficult to work in. So again, like the whole point is to stay in the game. That is the whole point. So you have to actually take care of yourself so you can stay in the game. All right, so that was compassion. We went on a little winding road, but we talked about compassion. Is everybody still with me here? Yeah, okay, good. So I want to tell another story about a patient. Again, this is kind of a composite because HIPAA, I don't want to give away anyone's identities. This story is kind of the perfect example. Is if the stars align and everything goes great, this is how personal change can go to collective action. And tell the story in the book. So this woman's name was Michaela. She originally came to see me to get treatment for her OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. And once we got that under control with medication and therapy, we started to work on real self-care. So boundaries, compassion, values, power. And she was doing great. She was like learning how to do the pause at work and like negotiating with her ex-husband, who she co-parented 2 teenage girls with. But then all of a sudden, basically everything hit the fan because her mom passed away unexpectedly. And it was basically assumed that her dad would just move in with her. She had a couple brothers who lived in town, but there was never even a question of like whether they would take her dad in. It was like, oh, okay, he's moving into your condo. And this was tough because in our work together in therapy, we had started to identify that one of her values was creativity. And so she had actually signed up recently for art classes at a local community college. And she was so excited. She was so excited about this. It felt like it was like this new kind of like opening in her life. Her daughters were older now, they were more independent. And then once her mom passed away, obviously she was dealing with the grief of that, but then she was like, okay, my dad has to move in. He has a lot of health problems, so we're gonna have to do some renovations on the condo. And so she was faced with this impossible choice of like, okay, do I choose myself and stick with these classes, pay for them, and also take the time and energy, or do I devote myself to my dad? So real self-care, right? It's a risk. It's always a risk. So what ended up happening, not surprisingly, is her OCD got really bad in the context of all of this. And she ended up being really brave, and she took a leave of absence from her job. And this was, for her in particular, a very big risk because she was a Black woman. And so she was even more worried that maybe she wouldn't get the next promotion that she was up for. She was worried that people would think that she was, lazy, all types of stuff. But she did it. And during that time, because she had more time, we were able to meet a little bit more regularly. She negotiated with her brothers, so they chipped in financially. She was able to figure out the whole Medicare system and all that terrible stuff, and got some home health aid hours, right? All these just kind of mundane things, but she could do that. She advocated for herself. And then she actually told a couple colleagues at her job that she was taking a mental health leave. And one of them, it turns out, had a son who had really severe OCD. And he had gone through just all of the heartache of trying to figure out how to get his son into therapy and all these things. So they kind of bonded over that. And when she came back to work, they started a support group for other folks at the firm who either had struggled with mental health issues or had a child or a parent or a family member that had struggled. Now, when she went up for her next performance evaluation, her supervisors actually commended her on the leadership that she had exemplified. And essentially, she got a pay raise. She got a promotion, and she got a pay bump for all of that work that she did. Now, you might say that this is again, the stars aligning, and it is, for sure. For sure, this is the stars aligning, and it doesn't happen in every situation. But again, when the change stays at the level of the bubble bath or the juice cleanse or the soul cycle, we don't even have a chance to get to that. But when the change is actually personal, then at least we have a chance of getting to that collective, social, structural change. The other thing about real self-care, because it starts with boundaries, is that even if you're not getting to reforming your workplace or, making huge waves at your kid's school, or it always changes the dynamics in your relationship and in your families, right? Because if you are somebody who is taking on more than your fair share of emotional labor in the home, then when you start employing the pause and you start saying no, when you start negotiating, it forces everybody else around you to show up a little bit differently. It's just a prerequisite, right? And even if that is as far as you get, that still has a cascade effect. That still impacts everybody else around you. Another example that I have in the book is of a patient who she had 2 kids, and she got pregnant with her 3rd kid, and for each of her babies, her husband never ended up taking a paternity leave because he worked for small startups, and they didn't have HR. He always felt like it was going to be too much of a burden for him to take time off. And when she got pregnant with her 3rd kid, she took a risk, and she said, hey, I need you to at least ask. I need you to be willing to ask for paternity leave. They might say no, but I want you to ask. And he asked, and they said yes. They said yes, and they created a new policy for paternity leave. It was only 4 weeks. It wasn't a huge amount of time, but it was a change. And she wasn't trying to be an advocate or an activist. She was just trying to feel better and not hate her husband and not get divorced, like literally, you know? And that's how change happens. I don't think that that's something that we need to be ashamed about. I'm a realist, and I believe in meeting people where they're at, right? So, okay. So now we're going to get to the hard part, if all this wasn't hard enough. We're going to talk about values. So the whole crux of real self-care: boundaries, compassion, values, power. The whole crux is on the values piece. Like, what is really important to you? What do you really care about? How do you want to show up in your life? Boundaries and compassion are sort of like, you could say, prereqs for the values bit. And by the way, just as a reminder, you can't gift any of this to your students unless you have it for yourself, right? So when I talk to people about values, or when I ask them about their values, one of two things happens. If it's a patient, and I say, like, well, what are your values? What do you really want in your life? What do you care about? Usually the reaction that I get is, Dr. Lakshman, how dare you? You know, don't you know that I have to figure out who's going to pick up Johnny from soccer, and we don't know what's happening for dinner tonight, and like how, you know, the renter who is in our other apartment like hasn't paid the bills, and, right? Like, it's like, no, I'm just trying to get through life. Like, I don't have time to think about this, so I recognize that. And again, be brave. The other response that I get is, I get like the stock answer, like, well, I value my kids, or like, I value my community. And it's like, okay, great, that's not helpful. Like, we all value our kids. We all value our families. The other thing is that a value is not a noun. A value is a verb or an adverb. So a lot of times we conflate goals and values. So a goal is to graduate college, right? A lot of your students have a goal of graduating. That's a goal. A value is, how do you want to show up as you're moving towards that goal? What do you want to embody? What qualities do you want to embody? So is it courage? Is it curiosity? Is it connection? Is it competition? Competitiveness? That's a value. Like, if that's your value, great. There's no right or wrong values. Again, a goal is like running a marathon, right? How do you want to show up as you're training? So because we have this mental block around values and like being honest with ourselves, I find that you have to kind of come to it indirectly. So I have an exercise in the book. There's a whole bunch of exercises in the book, but this is one of the ones I really enjoy. It's called the dinner party exercise, and stay with me, like, it's silly, but it's silly for a reason, because again, you have to come indirectly, otherwise you'll just get the canned responses. So imagine that you have $200 and you're going to throw a dinner party. What does that dinner party look like? And I know after this, there's going to be a workshop where you can go through some of these questions. So this is a great one to kind of talk about in the workshop. But yeah, what is that dinner party going to look like? Are you going to invite your best friend who plays in a band to play? Are you going to have it outside because y'all live in a gorgeous place? Why would you not want to be outside? Are you going to ask everybody? Is it going to be a potluck? Will you ask everybody who comes to bring a dish from the last state or country that they visited? Or maybe you want to look around and you want to see everybody laughing. Like, maybe for you, the value is humor, silliness. Or maybe for you, your mind immediately isn't about the people. Maybe it's more about the space and the scene, and you're thinking about the place settings. Maybe beauty is a value. So you kind of let yourself go there and fantasize, and then you pull out the verbs and the adverbs. And again, there's no right or wrong. Like, every single person in this room would have a completely different dinner party. And it's supposed to be that way. The other thing about this is if you asked yourself this question once a week for 4 weeks, each time you think about it, it would be a different dinner party. And that is good. That's actually how it should be, because values are always changing. Values are always shifting based on what's going on in your life, what your priorities are. Your values in your 20s are going to be very different than your values in your 30s and your values in your 40s. So when I use the word values, it's funny because I wish that I had had a better word as I was writing the book, because I think sometimes we hold values on this like pedestal of like, kind of like the Bible or, this kind of canon of values, but it's actually, I think it's more like values with a little v, right? It's kind of like what are the qualities that make you you and that come naturally to you, that you're attracted to and you're drawn to. So for example, and then what you do is you take this and you put this in your life. You put it in your life. I'm not saying it's easy, but it is sustainable and it leads to change. So for example, let's say you are somebody who is teaching a very serious class, maybe you're teaching calculus and it's like a very sort of linear thing. And maybe one of the values that comes out for you is silliness or humor. How do you bring that into your teaching, right? How do you take that value and incorporate it into how you're showing up in the classroom or on Zoom with your students? And how do you even take that and maybe thread it through your kind of quote unquote wellness activities? Maybe you're a runner and your running has gotten very serious. Maybe you have like a spreadsheet and you're one of those people that like has all the apps and the wearables and the things like that, and it's like a very serious thing, but maybe it doesn't, maybe that actually isn't aligned with your values. Or maybe a value that comes out is connection and community, being with others. And in that case, can you foster more of that in your life, with your students, with yourself, in your wellness too, right? Like maybe you can step away from the spreadsheet and join a running group, right? So again, everybody in this room is gonna take these messages that I'm talking about, and the goal is for you to think about them. I know I'm throwing a lot at you, but I want you to just think about them. Like, just let it kind of percolate and see where it takes you. Because again, real self-care is personal. Nobody can tell you what change you should make in your life based on this. Like, you're the only one that knows. The other thing I want to say about values, because as I was preparing to be with you all today, one of the pieces or the hints that I got from the administration of what y'all were struggling with was kind of like that the to-do lists are really long, that there's just so much work, there's so much to be doing every day to keep up with, and that y'all are like really hardworking and want to get through the to-do list. You want to do all the things. And this will relate to values, but first I want to just say, like, our to-do lists are delusional. I say our, myself included. Like, you can't have a to-do list of 10 things for one day. No, that's delusional. The thing is that you have to know what your priorities are. And that's where your values come in. Because when you're doing that dinner party exercise, you're using the feeling part of your brain. You're letting yourself imagine and fantasize and think about what feels good to you, what feels good in your body. Whereas when we're in our to-do lists, we're in the prefrontal cortex. We're in the thinking, planning, executing part of the brain. And the problem that I see most often with my patients, and also that I have to work on for myself too, is that when you're in the to-do list mode, you make the mistake of thinking that relief comes by finishing the to-do list. But that's wrong. That's our productivity addiction. And it's temporary, right? You get the hit of dopamine that you've checked the box, but it's not actually giving you the relief. The relief that you need is to step away from the to-do list and be in the feeling part of your brain so that you can come back and understand and know for yourself what the priorities are. I oftentimes see folks who are trying to decide what their priorities are when they're in fight or flight. Like when they're in prefrontal cortex, their whole nervous system is stressed. So when you're in that state, every single thing that you're juggling feels like a glass ball. And you all have probably heard the metaphor about like, well, you need to know which balls are rubber versus glass. But the thing is, like, when you're in that to-do list, fight or flight, stress state, everything feels like glass. So if you're there, if you find yourself there, remember, that's a sign that actually, like, your brain can't make the decision right now. And you need to step out, maybe do the dinner party exercise, go for a walk, and then come back when you're no longer feeling in that heightened state and decide from there. Okay, so there's one more bit with values, and I'm harping on this because, again, like the values piece that's the crux of all of this, because the values piece is what's your unique blueprint, like that's your thing, not anybody else's. So a couple months ago, when the book first came out, I did a talk at a university in the Midwest. And I was kind of like going through this with everybody, and a woman got up and asked a question, and she was like, oh, like Pooja, I've read the book, I think it's really great, I'm like trying to implement it, all these things, but I'm a professor here at this university, and I teach queer literature. And she's a lesbian, and she had really come to be sort of like the therapist in her department. All of the students that took her class were really impacted by all of the social assaults that were going on in our country at the time. So she would frequently have students coming into her office and being like, just crying, just bursting out crying, or even being like suicidal sometimes. And she was just like, I don't know what to do. I feel hopeless also. So like, how am I supposed to help them? So we got to chatting a little bit, and she was setting boundaries, she was being compassionate, but she was essentially asking me, like, how do I stay in the game, right? Like, how do I keep doing this and buoy myself? And it came out that actually she was already doing it, she just hadn't named it. She hadn't named it. So it turns out in her free time, she writes young adult novels, young adult queer literature novels that she self-publishes on Amazon. And they were like these sort of like superhero, like sci-fi novels. And she's written like 10 or 20 of them. Like she's been doing this for years. That's what she does with her rage. And people read them, people buy them and read them, and she gets emails all the time from young people who read these and are like, oh my gosh, I see myself in this story. Like it's helped me. And she just hadn't realized that she was doing that. Like that was her real self-care. So I share that because I want y'all, like as you're taking this material and thinking about it and wrestling with it, there might be things that you're already doing. You just haven't named it as real self-care and haven't made the connection to values. So, as we're wrapping up here, I want to come back to Sanjana. So you guys remember Sanjana? She was the woman in India with the 3 daughters that worked in the power looms. So she came to get treatment of her migraines and depression, and she started taking medication, and she was seeing a therapist, and she started to feel better. It was working. It was helping. And as she started to feel better, she became a little bit more emboldened. And when she was in her village, at one point she actually shared with a couple of her friends that she was coming to this clinic and getting help. And you wouldn't believe what her friends said, or maybe you do, or will. They said, me too, me too. And they just didn't know it. They didn't know that they were all actually getting help. And this just kind of like really opened things up for her. she just started being more and more brave. She was openly talking about the fact that she had depression. She took medication. She went once a month. She took multiple buses to see these doctors, and they were really helpful. And this is like, this is a woman who left school at 4th grade and is like in rural India in a village. Like, this type of thing does not happen. But she talked about it, and essentially her house in the village became like kind of like a little support place for younger women in the village who were having trouble with, like, their husbands were drinking too much, or like their mother-in-law was toxic, and they would come to like chat and vent, and like Sanjana would just kind of like throw in there about like, oh, I have depression and I go to this place, right? And so again, this cascade effect, that the way that you show up in your life now, if you're practicing real self-care, has the potential to impact everybody else around you. So the last principle of real self-care is power. And this is what I call power, like the ability to make choices aligned with your own values, not the values of the media, not the values of your parents, not the values of your kids, right? But your values, and to actually show up from there. So, to end things, I want to share a quote with y'all. This is from Audre Lorde. So Audre Lorde, if you don't mind, I'll actually just take a little tangent before I share this. So it was really interesting for me as I was writing Real Self-Care, because I started to do some research about like where the term came from. And it turns out that it has 2 lineages. One is from Black queer thinkers from the 1950s, 1960s, Audre Lorde and Bell Hooks, who talked about self-care as self-preservation, and specifically in the Black community and the queer community as this sort of violent self-preservation in the face of a culture and a society that was literally attacking them. The other lineage, which I just think this is really fascinating given the history of psychiatry, was that it actually was being used in psychiatry in the 1950s for patients on locked psychiatric units, so who were institutionalized against their will. Psychiatrists were using the term self-care to refer to the choices that the patients could make. So what they were going to eat, what type of exercise they were going to do, what type of clothes they were going to wear. So I just thought that was so fascinating, that it basically was, from the start, a highly subversive term, whether in the face of equity and racism and the general politics that were going on in society, and also in terms of what was happening in the healthcare industry too. So I'm going to read to you a quote from Audre Lorde, and then we'll take questions, or I'll take questions. Audre Lorde said, "Your power is relative, but it is real. And if you do not learn how to use it, it will be used against you and me and our children. Change did not begin with you, and it will not end with you. But what you do with your life is an absolutely vital piece of that change." Thank you all for having me.
We would like to open this up for any questions that you might have at this minute, and we'll walk by and give the microphone to you. Any questions that you might have?
It's not so much a question, it's just a response I had to something you said, and you were talking about needs. You're talking about mental health, and I like to talk to my students at the beginning of the semester about the mental health that we have here for free. But one of the big emphases I do is talk about how it's not always about like you need to fix your head, but that the mental health services has resources, and often your transitions, your mental health is, for a lot of people, is based upon a lack of resource. And so I just emphasize that our mental health services have knowledge about where they can get resources, and there's no fixing of the head if that's what they're afraid of or anything. So that's what I wanted to share.
Yeah, and all of our students can have 8 free sessions with graduate students from San Jose State who are interns, who are being supervised by Linnea. So please emphasize that to your students. It's a beautiful place. The health center is an amazing place to go get help.
Good morning. Hi, I'm Melissa Cerisa. I'm the program specialist with the Veterans Resource Center down here, so I work with our student veterans. And I was just thinking about what you said about compassion and how you need to allow yourself to say yes and to receive. I find that with my students, a lot of times they do say that, no, let's save that for someone else who needs that. And I want to let them know that, certain things I have to give only to them. I wouldn't have this and if it wasn't, to give to you. Do you have any advice on how I can, encourage them to say yes to themselves and to receive?
Yeah, I'm just kind of thinking through. Thank you for the question. I guess I would say a couple things. One, modeling is so powerful. So if it feels comfortable for you and if it feels appropriate, finding ways in your teaching to bring up your own use of resources or your own acceptance of help in different ways. Like, it can be big things or small things, but I think that that's really powerful. I think also that for students, they can feel uncomfortable when they're the only one. So normalizing when somebody does say yes, that there's enough for everybody, and finding ways when somebody does say yes. Okay, of course, again, we don't want to, we want to be respectful of everybody's privacy. And if there's any of these resources that folks would feel comfortable talking about or sharing, like how it helped them or what it did for them operationally, finding a way to kind of highlight that. Because I think once, especially kind of for a peer group, right, seeing within their own cohort that something has been useful really goes a long way to destigmatizing. Yeah.
I have a question. I'm going to read from the card. So Poonja, can you expand on the discernment between things we are doing for real self-care versus things we are doing that are staying in the game? Sometimes I find the line is blurry.
Can I ask a question of the person that asked? Do they feel comfortable? I see somebody laughing.
Yeah.
I guess I'm a little confused. Can you say more about the staying in the game, what that means? Like, can you give me an example?
Well, the example that you gave about the educator, that was one trying to stay in the game, teaching the queer literature, and the real self-care was the writing the stories. And I think for me, those two could be flipped. Like, the real self-care could be teaching literature, and the staying in the game could be the writing the books, because that's hard work. So is it important that we distinguish, and how do we know?
Yeah.
What?
That's I love that your mind went there. I hadn't even thought of that, and my answer is yes, it could absolutely be flipped. It just depends on the person and the circumstances and which thing feels more burdensome in the moment. And I would say over time that might shift just based on what's going on in your life and how you're making your income and how you're like what your responsibilities are in your family. I guess I think about staying in the game as in relation to the context of systemic oppression. And when we're talking about medicine or education, there's obviously like that looms large, but it also is true in creative work as well. So I think it just depends on why you're doing the thing. And so like so much of self-care, real self-care, the answer usually is it depends. And really it's up to you. Like you're the one that sort of knows the reasons behind and the context. Yeah. It's a very psychiatrist answer.
I think we have time for one more question.
Okay.
Mine was a comment, if that's okay.
Of course.
My name is Jen Wagner. I run the Success Center in the Embedded Tutoring Program, and transitioning to supporting students and helping them has been one of the most fulfilling things in my entire career. But one of the big things that we're up against all the time is this idea that seeking help is a sign of weakness. And it's especially prevalent in our culture. And so one of the things that my colleagues and I, and through our students and our tutors, I said, we got to destigmatize help seeking. But that still keeps the stigma in it, and it's kind of a negative. I'm English background, so I like words. And one thing that we've really moved towards is this idea of celebrating help seeking, like wherever it is. And not only that, but that there's evidence to prove that when students know how to, and not just students, but people in general, when you know how to identify a resource that can help you, and then make the brave step to actively seek that help and get the benefits from it, it helps with equity, it helps with society. It helps our society grow, and it helps us have better humans. So this idea that self-advocacy, that seeking help, that admitting to your weaknesses is a sign of weakness, I think we really need to debunk it in our culture. And I love that your book and your talks and these 4 areas that you're covering really speak to that. Thank you.
Thanks, Jen.
If I can add one thing to that, I would also say that it's also for faculty and staff too, not just students.
Great. I have one question before we finish. Just really, do you have one more over there? I want to know, you mostly mentioned women. I want to mention the men in the room, because I know we've looked at the numbers. Men are just not coming back to college in the same way. Do you have anything to say toward that?
Yeah, thanks for asking that. It's funny because the book is written for women because that's my specialty, and since it's been out, I've probably gotten, maybe like 30 or 40 emails from men saying, I know that I'm not the intended audience, but I found this to be so helpful. And one of the things that I've noticed is that in those emails, usually they talk about the values bit and how that was really the most important thing, whereas for women, when I hear from them, they talk about boundaries as the most important thing. So I think that, I think when we set things up as like a dichotomy between genders, then nobody wins, right? Because really this is about how to move things forward structurally, and we need everybody to participate. So I think that for men, it's not necessarily a different takeaway. The principles are the same. It's just which parts resonate more or less depending on what your dynamic is in your relationships and in your family.
All right, thank you so much. So I want to give a warm round of applause. Thank you so much.